gonna say slowly we'll drift away. I want you to stay.
He was a funny guy, Shakespeare. I'm Irish. Brother and two sisters. Yeah, I'm the eldest of four. So I've got two daughters and they live here. I mostly work for oil companies. Yeah. I spent 20 years in Africa. I was searching for gold. I was searching for oil in Nigeria. And I lived with the Tuareg for half a year. I've been traveling a lot. I mean, I've 132 countries now. Worked in Siberia. I was in the ANC back then before Mandela was released. That was a good party. Yeah, we were in Soweto the night that Nelson Mandela was released, and it was a mega hangover. For my 50th birthday, I made a promise to myself to try to see people better. Yeah. Yeah, it's quite the hardest thing to do. In Europe, it's generally speaking, we don't murder each other. If we did, we'd feel bad about it, you know. But I was in Papua New Guinea many years ago, and in a village, and a guy there was having a very bad time because one of his family had been killed, and he hadn't killed anybody in return, and he was having a big guilt trip about this. No, but he should have killed the guy, and he didn't, right? He was scared of the guy, and he didn't want to go near him, and all the rest of it, right? So he didn't do it, right? You know. So you step across the planet, and you step through time, and you get these enormous shifts in perspective. You know, I mean, you go to America and you find everybody every morning doing the Pledge of Allegiance to a flag. Yeah. I'm Irish. We regard that as practically fascism. I mean, I've been travelling since 1980 around the world, and it's getting pretty bad out there. When I first went to Indonesia, almost everybody had food. Small villages with fishing, etc. Not much medicine, but the general health was good. You could travel, you could stay lots of places, you didn't have to worry about security. It's not like that in most places now. The one place I see that's getting better every year is Africa. Africa's economic growth is good, its political growth is good. About 10% of Africa is unstable, but 10% of the world is unstable. I mean, Africa is fabulous. It is. I mean, where I lived in Botswana was more than 100 kilometers to my next neighbour. You know, and that was cross country. That took all day to drive. You know, and then past her was another 50 kilometers. She was a specialist in trees. Yeah. So to get to the shop took 1.5 days.
So how often do you go shopping, man?
About once a month.
Once a month?
Yeah.
In a car or?
A Land Rover.
Right.
Yeah. I had a Land Rover called Millie. Right.
You had a name for your rover?
Oh yeah. I'm an engineer as well, right? If you name machinery, you look after it better. Yeah. You know, if you get in a helicopter and the guy's got a name for a helicopter, it's safer. Yeah. If you treat machinery, if you personalise it and you take care more, you're more gentle with it. It lasts longer. I met an old lady once in Botswana. She was from Connecticut, a black American lady, and she was 81 years old making a movie on the sides of a river in Africa with her daughter and her granddaughter.
What kind of movie?
It was more a heartumentary.
All right.
Yeah. You know, it wasn't a document. It was more about showing the way the real world affects people's feelings. Yeah. And she wasn't trying to publish it or anything like that. She was just doing it for a thing that her and her family could do. Yeah. It was almost a private thing. I've never seen it published or anything, but it would have been lovely. But it was the first time I ever saw somebody make a movie or something for themselves. I met a hero once. I was with my brother in Tanzania, and we stayed in a place called Manyoni when we got a puncture on an old Land Rover we had. And we went to get something to eat in this little village, and there was some heavy guys there, sort of being a bit heavy with us. And there was a man in a suit, Tanzanian guy, and he asked us to join him at his table. And it turned out he was an engineer working for the government and got a very small salary. I mean, he was getting something like $15 a month. And he'd managed to buy a cow, a Jersey cow, and where he lived, cows had problems because of tsetse fly, so he built an enclosure that was fly-proof. He collected all the plants around the place, sent them to guys at Blue Cross and asked them how to make concentrate for a cow. Yeah. He had to cut the grass and bring it in.
Yeah.
There was a well that had been drilled, right, but people couldn't use it because of the nitrate content, so he used that for irrigation.
Yeah.
He raised 4 of his own children and 2 of his wife's sister's children, whose husband had died, all from this one cow. He did everything. He did the biology, the life cycle of insects in the area, how to look after the cow. He spent all night talking to my brother. My brother is a farmer. He's a cattleman and very good at helping cows calve. So the pair of them spent all night talking about cows calving. But this guy, in a very restricted environment, took everything he had around him and managed to manage a system circulating around a single cow that raised 6 people.
That's not bad.
He was that's a hero.
Yeah.
I mean, the effort he put in for 20 years, every single hour of every single day, to make it work. It's extraordinary. And my brother's a good guy at farming. He's won prizes. He's represented Ireland in European competitions, and he was just astounded. He said, for a man who's not got the right background to learn all this, put it all together, stay motivated. Right? When the first cow died, he had to get another one and keep it happening. Just to get the cow pregnant, he had to smuggle her across the border into Kenya. Once a year, he had to smuggle this cow off for sex.
Then bring it back.
Smuggle her back.
All right.
Without the border guards knowing, and without she getting bitten by tsetse flies or anything like that. And also the amount of milk he was getting, 13 litres a day, which is champion level. One cow. There's fabulous people, and I find it good that almost everybody you meet on the planet is okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't really understand how we have so many wars and problems when you hardly ever meet people like that. That's weird.
Is it?
Yeah, I don't understand how we seem to have about 0.5% of aggressive people in the world, but they're always in charge. People shooting at me always worries me, right? That's bad. Well, I'm not very brave, right? When people shoot at me, right, I run away and tend to hide a lot.
So what was the first time somebody shot at you?
Oh, God. It would have been when I first went to Nigeria. We had some armed robbers came into the camp and started shooting the place up, and we had some guards. They shot back, and once they realised we had guards, they legged it. They ran away, right? But yeah, I didn't sleep for a few nights after that. That was scary. Then in Johannesburg, when I left Johannesburg, there was a lot of shooting. I was in a truck and some guys tried to carjack it, but I just drove out of it. There was a big truck, and I drove out. It's things happening during daytime is not so bad.
Yeah.
It's when you're in a place where you can't sleep at night.
Yeah.
That's more scary. And I've always been vastly more scared of police forces than I have of the populace.
Yeah.
In most places where you're in trouble in the world, it's people in uniform cause the trouble.
Yeah.
There've been a few places, right, where things get sticky. But generally speaking, no. Right? Most of the time in most of the world, you're okay. There was driving across Russia in a place called Gazli, we had a chief of police who was very, very drunk with a gun.
Yeah.
But the people in the bazaar essentially rescued me, my ex-wife and the scientists we were with. They just swept around him, they gave him some vodka, they slapped him on the back. One of them took my passport out of his pocket, laughed at my picture, passed it through the crowd, said go. People are great. These total strangers moved into action to keep this drunken policeman from causing me or the 2 girls any harm. And they didn't know me at all. It was just a natural way to help. And you find that all over the world, like the gentleman I met in Tanzania, right, when the heavies were getting a bit aggressive with my brother and he just come and sit with me, right, You find that almost everywhere. I suppose your main safety in the world is other people.
Yeah.
The people are, generally speaking, good, they're helpful, they're friendly, and pretty much everywhere. Except Papua New Guinea. You've got to be really careful in Papua New Guinea. Right? You know, that place is terrifying. Yeah, that is really, really scary. But even stepping on somebody else's land, just stepping on it will get you killed. Right? The murder rate in Papua New Guinea is by far the highest in the world, and there's hundreds of reasons to murder people, and the only real law seems to be retribution. And it's been like that for thousands of years. Oh, when my daughters, two happy moments when my two daughters were born. Yeah, that was unbelievable. And I was quite old. I was 40 years old when Katie was born, and it's really weird to find that there's another person inside you. Up until 40 years of age, I had travelled everywhere. I didn't realise until my daughter was born that I'd never been afraid. I'd been nervous and apprehensive, but I'd never actually been afraid before. You know, even when things had gone wrong. I used to like spearfishing a lot, and you know, I like my kung fu and my fighting. But when my daughter was in my hands for the first time, it was the first time I actually felt vulnerable in the world, and I'd never known what it was to feel vulnerable before.
It makes you more sensitive.
Much more, yeah. And that's good and bad. It's the fact that you're worried that it's the responsibility, it's the care, it's the worry that you're not going to be able to look after this little person who depends on you. That was the huge shock. I mean, I stopped jumping out of aeroplanes, I stopped flying aeroplanes, I stopped abseiling. There was a whole lot of stuff that I just suddenly wouldn't do anymore. In case something happened to me, and there was nobody there for a car. And then my second daughter was born 2 years later, and really, the time before my daughter's was born seems like another person's life. A big thing. Becoming a father is the most profound thing that happened in my life. You know, by a lot. You know, it's an extraordinary time, and happy and scary. You suddenly, before I could always, it's like playing cards. You know, you play poker? It's okay if you can afford it. Yeah? Right? But when you put the food money on the table, you don't play such good poker. Yeah? Your nerves are in trouble. Now you're playing with something you cannot afford to lose. Yeah? And this is where having a child, you suddenly realise there are risks you can't take because the child is depending on you, and they're not a chip, they're not something you can gamble with. You just can't do that, and that was a huge difference. And the other thing extraordinary about children is that when they're really little, they're completely different from me and different from each other. You know, I hadn't really understood that beforehand. I thought they grew up to become who they are. But they're not. They're like that as soon as they can walk and talk. They don't change hardly at all. They learn stuff, but their character or their spirit or their soul is there all the time. And I think what you were saying about your parents, I think it's a mistake a lot of parents make, is thinking that you can change who a person is. You can't change. People get married and think they can change their wife. No, you can't. It's hard enough to change yourself. Even with small things. You know, it's like, I'm trying to get slimmer. It's a massive job.
So did you try to change your wife?
Sorry, my life?
Your wife?
No, we got divorced. Yeah.
No, before that?
No, that was the only real... I had two big relationships in my life, and that was one, and the other one was with an English lady years before that I spent 7 years with, and that ended up in a big disaster, right? Broke up all my friends, lots of my friends didn't talk to each other. She went off with my best friend a year after I saved his life. But, you know, there's an old joke in English, I don't know if it exists in German, is that my wife ran off with my best friend, and I still miss him. Oh, I never forget. She was a lady called Linda. Yeah.
She was a lady called
Linda. And I was in secondary school, and I was in a Catholic boarding school, all boys. But in the summer, we could go to a language school to learn Irish, which was co-educational, had girls there. And we learned Irish during the day, and then in the evenings we had dances and ceilidhs and music, etc. And it was a good time, right? Yeah. And I was about 16 years of age. The summer I was 16, and I was brought up on a farm, so I knew a lot about biology, but nothing about relationships. You know, I mean, honestly, the first time I slept with made love to a woman, I was quite young, but I didn't actually know that people made love face to face. I had no idea. I'd never seen an animal do that before. I found that really embarrassing, having to actually look at the girl's face. You know, I mean, there's a legend amongst women that you can tell all you need to know about a man in the first kiss, and I think there's probably truth in that. It's in many ways kissing is more intimate than almost anything you do. If you take the urge of sexuality away, right, the sheer gentleness and passion of a kiss is in many ways more telling, more communicative than all the gymnastics. Sorry, my story, yeah. But no, that was the first time I kissed a girl, right? And it was dizzy. Yeah, I wasn't breathing enough, right? There was definitely not enough oxygen there, right?
So did you know what was about to happen, or was it just like a situation?
We'd been building up to it for about a week.
All right.
Yeah, you know, dancing every night. Right? I knew I was like in with a chance, right? Because when you're dancing in Irish dancing, you swap partners all the time. It's not like a waltz. So you're going around and you're swapping and the rest of it. And you can tell which girls like you because they hold on strong. They've got a better grip of you, right? It's quite good. You're not embarrassed, right? You know, you've got a lot of indication beforehand about whether if a girl is just touching your fingertip in a dance or whether she's got the proper hold of you. You get a lot of messages, you know. So we'd been building up to it for a while, and we were both exceedingly innocent, you know, exceedingly innocent. Kissing is though, it's a big deal. The older I got, when I was very young, kissing was a big deal, and then in my midlife it wasn't, because there was a lot of girlfriends and, you know, it was the 70s and 80s, it was all a bit mad, because there was no AIDS, you know, it was before HIV existed. If you caught a sexual disease, you could cure it. Everybody expected the Russians and the Americans to destroy the world, so it was all that, you know, it was a hell of a time. The late 70s, the parties were unbelievable, you know. I did make a mistake when I mentioned that to my sister's kids, who were quite strict young ladies, right? They didn't know how wild their mom was. In Africa, we were talking to these bunch of Maasai guys in a bar, and I went outside to take a leak, so I'm having a pee, and this Maasai guy comes out and he's talking English to me, and he goes to me, he said, "You know, your brother's great." And I went, "Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I think." "Oh no," he said, he's like a proper person." Well, I said to him, I said, "What do you mean a proper person?" He said, "Well, he really understands how important cattle are." He said, "Most white people are just crazy." He said, "I thought it was great, you know, they'd finally met a white person who was a proper person." Just fell in love, right? You know, so that's all it is. I mean, love often doesn't work out in the practicality of the world, but you just fall in love, right? You know, it's a bit of a shock when it doesn't work out, and it takes a long time for your brain to actually understand that, right? But I've spoken to friends of mine who've been divorced. I mean, I've got a phone friend of mine who's been divorced 3 times, but he was a lot younger when he first got married, you know. And but people are different, you know. I know people who can spend years on their own, and then suddenly fall in love and get married. I've seen people do the opposite, where they fall in love every 6 weeks. You know, it's and I don't understand it. There's no point in even pretending I understand it. Right? It's, and I've known people. I've got 2 friends of mine, a couple, and they're almost 80 years old, and they've been in love since they were 6. They were this big in school in California, and that was over 70 years ago. And they grew up together, and they went out together, and they got married together, and they've stayed together, and they're still each other's best friends, 70 years on. Which is...
Congrats.
Yep. Yep. No, they still. I mean, I've done a lot of work for them. They still make each other laugh like every 2 hours.
Yeah.
It's great, you know. It's a funny world. It's a funny world. And then you meet strange people with cameras doing stuff like this, right? When you're least expecting it. Oh no, trust me, right? I'm getting old, right? Staying young would be a good thing. I'm 3 years off 60, right? And I feel about 19. Beautiful story was a lady in Australia who said, does it make me a bad mom? Because just before the nurse was coming to visit, she had her little baby boy, and she was sitting there bored, so she gave him a moustache with a pen, right, to see what he'd look like. But she couldn't rub it off, it was the wrong kind of pen. So for the next week, her little boy's got a moustache. Right? You know. Well, how do you interpret that? It was fun thing to do, right? You know, but you know, if you decide to go to a party dressed in drag and then 10 years later somebody's going, look, this guy's got transgender issues and he shouldn't be talking on this subject because we've got a photograph. No, it wasn't. I was just drinking. You know. Misinterpretation is really easy. I mean, half the time when I do things, I don't know why I did it. So somebody else deciding why I did it is totally ridiculous. You know, so this business, this idea with autonomy and all this stuff, looking at us on the internet and looking at our lives and checking all our patterns, I think it's a fantasy that it really can say it understands us. It might be able to track us, it might be able to interfere with us, but it doesn't understand people. I don't think it can. Yeah, big data. I mean, I know it's all to sell us stuff. The interesting thing I found about Berlin is all the non-German people I meet here. You know, I meet a lot of Persian taxi drivers, you know, that are here, and they've all got these amazing stories about how they wound up here, how they avoided the revolution. You know, there's a lady taxi driver here, and her daughter's in Berlin as well, and talking to her about it. And if you ever get a chance to go to Iran, it's well worth it. Fantastic place. Yeah, really. It's easy to travel in. The people are incredibly hospitable. Yeah. They all talk politics all the flippin' time. So if you think you're being judged harshly elsewhere, move to Berlin. You know.
Said our goodbyes. Said our goodbyes underneath the blue-lit sky. Said our goodbyes. 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 Said our goodbyes.